Hi, Dreamers. This month I received over $3,600 from Synstocks. And this week, Altria, ticker MO, announced earnings, and here's the results. They beat earnings per share and beat revenue. So I'm a happy camper. I'm going to tell you why I think there's a unique opportunity to buy and own Synstocks that's quickly slipping away. Let's take a look at my positions and key metrics. Now, before we get to the juicy part, just as a reminder, even though I may be YouTube anonymous, I'm business famous. And because of this, I post videos sporadically, but try to post a video at least once a week. So click that subscribe and bell notification if you want to be alerted of a new video, since sometimes I get busy and post at all times of the week and all hours of the day. All right, so here we are in my spreadsheet. And the first one here is ticker symbol MO, or Altria. And I've got 3,142 shares of Altria. Now, the price has been all over the place today, but at time of download, it was $50.32 for a total value of $158,136. These were the most recent X dates and pay dates, the yield above 7%, and so that nets me an income of $11,306 per year, or $2,826 per quarter. Moving on to ticker symbol PM, which is Phillip Morris. I've got 721 shares here at about $100 a share, so that brings me to about $74,200. The yield is just below 5% right now, so I get an income of $3,636, or around $900 every single quarter. BTI is British American Tobacco. We have 157 shares here. This is a relatively new position I just opened up, and I'm going to show you when I opened up all of these positions so you can get a sense of how new or old my positions are. Last price was $42, so I have about $6,685 in there. And the yield is almost 7%, giving me about $465 in income per year. And then I have a micro position here of UVV, which is a REIT, more of a kind of a farm grower of tobacco. And so 31 shares there at $55 and just under $2,000, the yield of 5.57 and $97. So what I'm going to do is cover the big positions I have, which is obviously MO, PM, and BTI in terms of the stats. So you can see the stats here on Altria. Beta, you want it to be under 1.0. It's at 0.7, which is fantastic. Dividend increases, 52 years. I mean, that's older. They've been doing it longer than I've been alive. So that's quite impressive. Dividend increase 52 years consecutively. It's 52 years. I know they have a payout ratio target of about 80%. They try to keep it under 80%. So at last look, it was 70%. And then they have a 5-year CAGR of 8.4, which is great. PM, which is essentially the international part that's split off from Altria, 4.9%, 0.9 beta, which is fantastic. Dividend increases 13 years straight, 13 consecutive years, payout ratio of 69 and a 3.5 CAGR for 5 years. And then BTI, we've got 6.96 and 0.9 beta, which is great. Dividend increase only 3 years, and I'm going to show you the graph of what that looks like. But consecutively been paying out for 12 years, payout ratio fantastic at 58%. And a really good 5-year CAGR at 6.3. Okay, so why do I think this is a big opportunity that won't last long? Of course, there's pros and cons to any stock and any stock category. And the cons to tobacco are obviously regulation. But this article by the Motley Fool, I think, summed up nicely my point of view on why it is a big opportunity. So first of all, there's steady and growing revenue earnings. You see things like it's still holding about 50% of the cigarette market in the U.S. They have, rising earnings per share. They are also buying back shares. So Altria reduced its weighting average diluted shares outstanding by 0.5% through stock buybacks. So that's a good thing as the number of shares go down. The payout is secured by a huge cash flow, and that's what we looked at earlier. And then, third, there's a PE ratio of 9.7. It's a pretty good bargain right now. The other thing that's kind of interesting is that cigarette sales grew in 2020 for the first time in 20 years. Now, that wasn't all by Altria. It was looking across the industry at Altria, at, Reynolds American, which is BTI, and Vector Group, but across all, cigarette sales rose. And there's a few different beliefs as to how this happened or why this happened. Obviously, the stress of the pandemic is one, but also I was actually listening to a podcast about this, that since so many people are working from home, there's a lot of tobacco use occasions that have actually increased. So you could be sitting at your desk in your own home with a packet of cigarettes, just smoking away as you continue to work. So let's take a look at the stock price, and you can see, obviously, you can see the steady decline as people, as people think that this is a declining industry. But then something interesting is happening here at the, after 2020. And you can see this black dot is actually where I picked up all of my shares. And I've just continued to, that's where I picked up the bulk of my shares, and I've continued to kind of add to that position ever since. Also, there's an interesting thing here with some insiders buying more stock. So, paying attention to insider trading and insider transactions isn't always super important, but it can be just an interesting note. So here's what the last 10 years look like in terms of stock price for PM. Not quite the up and down that you saw for Altria, and I think that's because of the regulation not being as difficult in the international markets as it is in the US. But, you can also see this interesting thing happening again after 2020, which is this rise in the stock price. And here's that black dot when I picked up my shares for PM, which is basically February of 2021. And then here's what BTI looks like, which is interesting. You see a pretty even increase until about 2018. And my understanding is that this is when, there was, the potential of FDA regulations and, some trouble. So stock price declined precipitously there, but has kind of stayed at the bottom here. And then this black dot here is where I picked up is roughly July of 2021, when I started seeing these numbers get really attractive. And then all of a sudden you start to see a little bit of an increase here in BTI. And, before we talked about only 3 years of dividend growth, this is kind of what it looks like in terms of, the dividend history growth. Once again, it's kind of similar to how, what we talked about in the Canadian stock video that I just made on BCE. If you want to see that consistent increase, this might not be the stock for you, but if you're okay with, 7 to 8%, yield, which I am, then this might be an okay stock for you. For me, BTI, it's this article by Seeking Alpha kind of represents how I feel too. It's like, hey, in a defensive, cyclical time, this is a cash machine, and I am cool with parking some money here and just letting it kick off income. But this is really the reason why I'm so bullish on it. And it's really that the future of tobacco, I think, is cannabis. And that is going to provide a growth engine, maybe not next year or the year after, but when it kicks in, it's gonna kick in, really well. There was this Forbes article that, talks about a few things. One is that you may be surprised that, the tobacco giants, when they get into cannabis, it may be very diverse. They could go into edibles, oils, beverages, vape. It doesn't necessarily have to be smoke. And, it's not just big tobacco that's interested in this. There's biopharmaceutical and pharmaceutical companies that are very interested in partnering with the tobacco companies as well. So there's a lot of different ways that this could go. The other interesting part of this article was that Altria actually lobbied on cannabis sales in Virginia, and that marked the first time a tobacco company had lobbied on cannabis in the U.S., either at the state or federal level. The reason why that's interesting is, if you know anything about lobbying, you know that Altria and tobacco, they spend quite a bit of money on lobbying. And so of all the companies that would be able to help cannabis really grow and make a case for it and get all of the legalities out of the way, this is the group. With 7,000 employees, huge company at Altria, they have the chops, they have the experience. This is essentially what they do. So the lobbying component is super interesting. If you add to that the fact that the pharmaceutical companies are the number one lobbying industry, and they spend about $23 million a year on lobbying, I think we have quite a bit of industry juggernauts that are going to be going after this with full steam. And if you go to Altria's website, there's actually a section dedicated to cannabis and CBD, where they talk about their strategic investment in the Kronos Group, and they talk about this little blurb at the bottom. We believe it's time for a national dialogue on how to develop a responsible legal and regulatory framework for THC cannabis. And as part of their work in the area, they participate in the Coalition for Cannabis Policy, Education, and Regulation. So they are, in a sense, declaring that they are not only going to participate, but they are going to lead, and also it tips their hand a little bit to, they're going to be making acquisitions. They're going to, and I think we're going to see, some innovation and a lot more acquisitions in the space. You see BTI also doing kind of a similar thing with their 20% stake in the Canada-based cannabis producer. And, what's interesting here is, they're also making strategic investments because of the R&D that's farther down the road. The other thing I thought was super interesting in this article was kind of down at the bottom, where essentially a banker is saying that as global cannabis deregulation gains pace, led by the U.S., that they have been increasingly approached by not only to big tobacco, but big pharma and leading FMCG companies, and that's basically CPG companies, or consumer packaged goods, looking to invest in the cannabis sector. So, this is at the very beginning of a growth cycle, and so that's another reason why I have over almost $250,000 ready to go in this space. I'll leave you with one last perspective. If you're not comfortable owning any stock for any reason, don't. My thought on smoking stocks are, in the past, people didn't know the dangers of smoking, but today they do, and the information is widely available and readily accessible. There are warnings on all packages. There is regulation on all tobacco advertising. So at this point, I feel like consuming tobacco is similar to consuming alcohol in that you know the dangers and it's a choice. In addition, the industry actually has an opportunity to do some good. There are many, many studies in medical journals out there talking about the benefits of CBD and cannabis in general. As always, I encourage you to keep learning, keep implementing, and go ahead and do your own research and put it into practice. And as a reminder, I'm not a financial advisor, so keep in mind these videos are for entertainment and inspiration only. I'll see you on the flip side.